Hello again. Thanks for joining us for this next session on leadership and organization. So leadership, organizational versus individual resilience. As I'm sure some of my colleagues have repeated throughout the day, we are all working from home. So please bear with us if a dog barks or a postman comes to the door. So I'm Matt Powell-Howard. I'm head of learning and partnerships at NEBOSH. And they do say never work with animals, children, or Ed Corbett, but I'm joined here today. Well, he's by a good mate of mine, actually. Ed and I have worked together for about the last 5 years, off and on. Hi, Ed. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi folks. So yeah, my name's Ed Corbett. I lead on human factors and organisational psychology at HSE in what we call science division, where we do a lot of the science and research. And yeah, worked with Matt quite a lot over the years, particularly on the leadership qualification that we do jointly between NEBOSH and HSE. And yeah, I guess we're picking up on a topic which kind of emerges in some of the conversations and presentations, conferences that we go to. So hopefully this will be useful to people today.
Yeah, thanks, Ed. It really is ubiquitous, isn't it? People talking about resilience, individual resilience. There's a million training courses out there on individual resilience and actually not much on organizational resilience. So with this, it's going to be a fairly relaxed conversation, really, just talking about what works, what doesn't work, what's out there, what's available that people can maybe adopt and look to implement within your own organizations. So, quick agenda for you then, and I would say please keep the questions coming as we go through this session. We'd really like to hear what you've got to say. We've already captured some questions from social media. I went out there on LinkedIn and a few other platforms to say, hey, you got any questions for Ed and myself? More for Ed, I would say. This is where he's an expert. So I've just passed all responsibility over to you there, Ed. So please do keep your questions coming in. We'd love to hear from you. So we've done the welcome, we've done the introduction. We're going to cover what does resilience actually mean. We're going into organizational versus individual resilience and look at the differences that are available. And then really it's just going through some of the Q&A, some of the questions that have been sent through to us. There's only about 5 or 6 slides to go through, so please bear with me. So, definition of resilience then. Good old Oxford English Dictionary there, able to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. And you'll see this coming through the other definitions. It's that sort of bounce back. You'll see it coming over around again and again. So the American Psychological Association there defines resilience as a process of adapting well in the face of adversity. So adaptation, bounce back, trauma, tragedy, threats, or even significant sources of stress. And that's what they feel individual resilience is. A protective factor, inoculating against the detrimental effect of future challenge, and the ability to bend but not break. I just thought this was quite nice. The ability to bend but not break, bounce back, and perhaps even grow in the face of adverse experiences. Or the one I really did like was this one from Timex, the ability to take a licking and keep on ticking. I know that's a bit cringy, I just enjoyed it. But maybe it's better to consider resilience as a process of adapting, learning, and then moving forward. Ed, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is perhaps one of the challenges we've got with resilience as a term, as something we talk about and we train on in organisations, is that there is such a variation in the definitions out there. I mean, if you take the word resilience itself, it does have that, I think it's a Latin origin of bouncing back, hence that sort of frequently a part of the definition of resilience. So yeah, I think some of these definitions maybe distort that perspective of bouncing back. That maybe the Timex one is quite extreme, and maybe we'll come onto this in some of the later discussions and conversation. But it's perhaps some of that distortion that can create challenges for organisations. Because if we expect people to be, completely robust and tough and not sort of suffer from any kind of stressful conditions, then is that a realistic expectation that we can pick up on some of that as we progress through?
I really like the bit about individual resilience, about perhaps even grow from that experience, even if it's just to say, do you know what, I'm not going to accept this. This isn't for me. This isn't okay. And recognizing where your own professional boundaries are. And I think that is learned, isn't it? As you go through your career, what you would tolerate, early in your career to what you would, maybe we just get more sort of grouchy as we get older. I don't know, but certainly it's about, you know, putting your own professional boundaries in place. I think is part of this as well. But as you say, we'll maybe get into that a little bit more.
But that's a really interesting one as well. I mean, we used to talk about, you know, some years ago about self-selection of certain jobs, and actually people would sort of come to that conclusion that actually this type of career, this type of job isn't really for me, and you would take that sort of personal choice to you know, look at a different career, a different type of career, or a different organisation. As well, so perhaps that's part of the decision making there as well.
Well, hold that thought in your head, Ed, because that is one of the questions we've had, and so we'll come back to that in a minute if we may. So why is the focus on resilience so prevalent? 2017, I know that seems a long time ago with everything we've been through with the pandemic, and I suppose 3 or 4 years ago in the great scheme of things, it is you know, it has been a bit of passage of time, but the Farmer Stevenson review was a really good piece of work. It was certainly impactful within the world of health, safety, occupational health. And it really did highlight the need for employers to actively engage with the mental health of their employees by providing more supportive workplace. And by providing those more supportive workplaces, the review also reported that there was multiple benefits from that, both at home, at work, and to the organization itself, in teaching or spending time with its employees to put over to them how to manage pressures and workplace demands. We know the statistics, and I'm sure my colleagues elsewhere on today's conference have covered some of these statistics, but it's worth reminding ourselves that certainly within Great Britain, where it's easier to collate the data, some 18 million working days were lost in 1920 due to work-related stress, depression, or anxiety. You know, stress is this non-medical term, but depression, anxiety, you know, this is serious. And some of it is work-related, some of it isn't, of course, but it all manifests itself in the workplace. You know, and I think that sometimes gets lost as well. So the main factors associated with the high rates of stress, and we could guess these, couldn't we? I don't think we'd need anybody to tell us these. We could guess these, I'm sure, but it's associated with tight deadlines, pressure to meet targets, be they financial or time, lack of control. I mean, this is classic stress management standards that HSE have had since about 2006. Lack of support, change, and role uncertainty. And you know, let's face it, we have had an awful lot of uncertainty over the last 18 months. The impact of the pandemic has yet to be fully realized. It's certainly yet to be realized in the stats that are available. And then this concept of presenteeism, you know, where we all keep turning up when we're not really well enough to be at work, but also this other scary term of leavism, where people are now taking time off work to catch up with the work that they haven't had time to complete whilst at work. I mean, it's just incredible, isn't it? And then when I was thinking about this, and I thought, yeah, you know, I do emails. You know, even if it's just clearing out emails, so then I don't have to do them when I get to work. And okay, I'm choosing to do that rather than feeling the pressure on myself to do it. But still, you know, is it good for us not to have that clean break from work, that time away? And we will all have seen actually now that lots of organisations, and I think I'm right in saying this, that HSE do this, Ed, that after about 7 o'clock, you know, you don't send emails, you don't receive emails. Your weekends, you know, or your weekends, there is this cleansing of people. Cleanse, that sounds very sinister. There's this sort of cleansing of your mind, so you do get that break from work before you return, hopefully refreshed on a Monday morning.
I actually noticed recently, Matt, as well, that I was about to send an email, and it was, I don't do it very often, but it was you know, maybe slightly after the normal working day, and the email account system said, oh, you seem to be sending this perhaps out of normal hours. Would you like to delay sending until 9 o'clock in the morning? So I thought it was interesting that there are software now is contributing to perhaps overcoming some of those challenges. Just to pick up on some of the data as well, I think maybe something that people might find interesting, and it's perhaps difficult to completely unpick as to the reasons behind that. But when I first joined HSE back in 2004, working on the management standards, I think stress cases were around a couple of 100,000.
Right.
And the last reporting year was about 800,000 cases. So there's quite a significant change in the numbers, and it still seems to be going in an upward trajectory. There might be many reasons for that. Maybe some of the stigmas sort of dropped away from that as well, and there's an increased ability for people to feel they can report that. But certainly it's an ongoing issue that we've not resolved yet.
Yeah. And is that a piece of work that HSC are looking into to see why there hasn't been that sort of dramatic spike, to say whether or not actually some of those stress issues were hidden within, I don't know, musculoskeletal data, or in somebody's claiming a bad back when actually they just can't get out of bed in the morning, or whatever it might be?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is certainly an element of comorbidity. I don't think there's any specific research to try and unpick that. It's complex because, as you know, workplaces have changed so much over the years as well. There's been an array of different types of interventions that have been brought in, so it's really hard to pinpoint the exact reasons for this increase over the years.
Yeah, get rid of email. Let's bring back typewriters and sending letters. I think some of the interventions that workplaces are looking to do now, just to keep people fresh, is really healthy. And one of my colleagues, I noticed, who works, I received an email from her. At the bottom of her email, it said very clearly when she works and when you can expect a response, at the bottom or footer of her email. And I think it just really sets the tone. I thought it was very, very nice touch, actually. Yeah. So there are lots of models out there as to what personal resilience looks like. I really like this one from the British Psychological Society, because it's based on evidence and it's based on research. And one of the problems with some of the personal resilience training that is out there, very often it isn't based on any modeling, it isn't based on any evidence-based research. It's, a consultancy has gone in and said, oh yeah, we can provide some resilience training for you. In a previous role, I received some, and it was pretty ropey, in all honesty. So I really liked this model, and some of it I don't think you would argue with. How you train and put that over to individuals, you can't realistically do it in a 3-hour session either. I don't know if you have a view on that, Ed. I mean, everyone's looking for a magic bullet, aren't they, when it comes to, I'm going to teach my people resilience, in a morning. You go, not really. No.
Yeah, that's it. I think it's probably something that that change is going to occur over quite an extended period of time. And I think, I mean, you picked quite an evidence-based model here, but there are so many different models out there. Often they'll contain some of the same sorts of topic areas, but when you do look at the training that's out there, for particularly on the individual resilience side, there is a real a myriad of different methods and approaches that are brought into play on that. And I think this is perhaps why some of the evaluation of effectiveness is so limited, because there are so many different types of training out there to improve people's resilience at that individual level. And it becomes quite difficult then to evaluate the impact of that when you're comparing apples and pears. When you look at some of the systematic reviews and meta-analyses, so analyses of lots of other studies, the evidence becomes or impact becomes quite low to sort of moderate on the impact there. So so many different approaches. Again, that does make it really difficult to evaluate the effectiveness and impact. But some of the topics that we've got here do seem quite consistent with a lot of those models out there.
Yeah, I mean, the one there that leaps out straight away is social connection. And in the light of how we've all been working over 18 months, and I think elsewhere on today's conference, Alexis and Maria are going to be talking about, or touching upon, about how we, keep teams on board, with remote working and agile working. And if they're not, social connection takes deliberate effort, doesn't it, with the way we're working at the moment. I know throughout certainly the pandemic, you and I were talking regularly through Teams, and you can still maintain and keep that social connection in lots of different ways. You don't all have to be in a physical workplace, but it is so important to sort of keep you up and keep you focused.
Yeah, and it's taking the effort in the modern, more remote working styles, and I guess that will start to drift more towards more and more hybrid working as we move forwards now. But it takes a different approach, and I think perhaps we've been a bit reluctant to fully recognise that we're in a different situation, that the social connections aren't quite the same. You don't just walk past someone's desk or bump into someone on a corridor and have a bit of a chat, but you can still recreate a lot of those moments, but it takes a slightly different approach and a different effort. So I think you're right, that social connection element is a really, really critical one, getting different perspectives, different thoughts, having that sort of just someone there to have a cathartic sort of conversation with, and chat through, get ideas, all that kind of stuff. So critical to getting us through stressful events.
Yeah, I mean, this part of the wedge there around resilient thinking. You know, that as a statement is actually huge, isn't it? You know, you actually trying to put those skills into people, or provide those skills, that skilled thinking to individuals, training them, teaching them how to do it. You know, it's going to come on to one of the questions in a minute as well, and I'll allude back to that. But that as a statement seems fairly, you know, okay, oh, that's good. Doing it is incredibly difficult, isn't it? You know, I'm sure we've all worked with a few sort of Eeyores in our time, and you know, and that's who they are, and God love them for it. But you know, it's going to be much more a challenge of those. And then we also have worked with people who, you know, they've got the cap on down the side of the head and then walk with a spring in the step, and you wish you could bottle some of that as well. But
yeah, I agree. I think that maybe one of the challenges also around is that particular chunk of the model on this occasion as well is how some of these things can get slightly distorted as well. So yeah, completely agree. When it comes to things like optimism, really important sort of attribute to have as well. And I think it's understanding what optimism is a key part of that as well. So I think it sometimes gets heavily confused with positivity, being a positive kind of person. To me, optimism is very much about, you know, if you're faced with some kind of challenge, it's recognizing there's a challenge there to be dealt with, and sort of, you know, getting those different perspectives to how you might overcome the challenge, and yeah, being optimistic that you can succeed and get through that. But you do sometimes see almost like an enforced positivity, where it's not okay to talk about problems and issues and surface those. And that can kind of suppress people's emotions and responses to challenging situations. So yeah, there's some famous professors out there who do promote this idea of what they call toxic positivity, that being overly positive all the time can actually be damaging to yourself as well, particularly on that emotional side and the emotional resilience. So it's making sure that as well that those who are training on this, that management and leadership in organizations, actually understand this stuff if they're talking about it in that everyday context in their organizations.
Toxic positivity, incredible. I'll do some reading around that. I know what you mean, though. Some people you just want to, you know, punch them in the face when they're coming over to you with their toxic positivity. And actually what people want is consistency, isn't it? That's what people are looking for, certainly within leaders. But we'll move on, if we may, to organizational resilience. So I think this is largely the last slide, or I've got one more after this. So again, this was a really, I like to go to well-researched models, and I would say to colleagues who are listening in, who are looking at maybe working with their HR functions, who are buying in resilience training for their colleagues, for their teams, for their staff, really asking what the program is based around, what it's evidenced against, is something that I would urge you to do. And certainly part of that can be experience, but it's always nice if you can be able to hang something off it. So this is a really nice model, I felt, from the International Consortium of Organisational Resilience. So it's based on ISO 22316, which is Security and Resilience, Organisation Resilience Principles and Attributes. And yes, I did just read that. So I think we recognise actually that each organisation is unique. However, the work by the International Consortium of Organisational Resilience found that those organisations who were able to respond to change and uncertainty shared these key dimensions. So those dimensions being leadership strategy, culture and behaviours, and preparedness, managing risk. That then can be changed into or sort of hammered down into 9 types of strategies. So if we take leadership and strategy, for example, a shared vision understands context, effective leaders, and that's certainly what we allude to within our joint NEBOSH HSE certificate in health and safety leadership excellence. And then further, there's these 16 behaviors in the middle of the model there. And some of those 16 behaviors, I'm sure, not only can we see them on an organizational level, but recognize that they would be really good attributes in terms of individual resilience as well. You know, creativity, somebody who's creative is a really good sign that they're thriving, actually. Being collaborative, you know, this is where the joy of the workplace, certainly for me, really is most impactful. You know, I love working with colleagues like Ed and other colleagues at HC, wider business, when we're developing new products and services, and certainly my own colleagues who, you know, I've never worked with a better bunch and more creative bunch in all my career. So certainly some of those factors in the middle there, some of those behaviors at an organizational level, I can see how they would be massively impactful on an individual level, and how we can identify them and start drawing them out during a recruitment process or a promotion campaign should be something that we really reflect on, in all honesty. Ed, is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had conversations previously about this as well. I think I do feel that the organisational resilience aspect is a really important one. I would argue perhaps more than the individual side. I do feel that there's in some organisations there's a drive to shift away that responsibility, if you like, for dealing with stresses and pressures of the work environment and so on, away from the organisation onto individuals, and it's sometimes seen as that sort of silver bullet. Whereas I think the organisational approach is much more resilient, and it actually aligns quite well to the management standards. You know, with the management standards, we refer to different intervention types. You know, primary, secondary, and tertiary type interventions. You could probably suggest that the resilience training and that kind of intervention is more of a secondary type intervention. The organisational approaches would fit more to a primary level intervention, something that's much more robust. You know, if we compare it to the hierarchy of controls, we're talking something that's a much more robust type of control. So I do think this approach is it's better. It's going to have a more influence over people's stresses in the workplace, rather than shifting that burden onto individuals. So I do think these are valuable. I think the definitions are quite variable, again, as with individual resilience, and we also get other terminology creeping in, things like resilience engineering as well start to creep in there. That's right. Maybe something we can pick up on. So people like Eric Harnagel will pick up on safety 2, for example. And I think that the definitions there are more related to ability to succeed under varying conditions, which is perhaps slightly different to this sort of bounce back idea that we have with individual resilience. But I also like the fact that the organisational approach is perhaps less focused on this toughness. So with some of the definitions around individual
mental toughness, it's so very negative, isn't it?
Well, I feel it's kind of taken us down the pathway of shifting the sort of burden onto individuals, that they have to be tough, they have to be robust, they have to be, you know, like a tank. You're not affected by the pressures and stresses around you, and I think that's perhaps quite damaging. You're starting to see now that some of those terms are creeping into things like job adverts and job statements and those kind of things, and that is a little bit worrying. And I wonder how it fits with things like diversity and inclusion. We have, you know, a big agenda to increase that in organisations, rightly so, and it fits into the organisational resilience model that you've got here. We talk about bringing your true self to work and these kind of things, but then we have these contradictions as to you've got to be tough, you've got to be, you know, almost back to we've got to be macho again, and these kind of phrases, which I think creates quite a big conflict. So yeah, I guess to summarise that, I think this kind of approach is much more robust, much more effective.
Yeah. Well, thanks for that, Ed. I didn't realise it was creeping into some you know, job descriptions now, and if it is, that's a shame, because actually, even if somebody is struggling, the workplace can be the best place for them, can't it? You know, work is good for us if it's good work. We know that. That's something that we all talk about all day long, every day. But I'm sure many of us have also had times within our careers when we've just said, you know, I'm creaking here. You know, this is unreasonable what's being expected of me.
And some of the things you've got in the model here sort of contribute to creating that good work environment. Definitely.
Yeah. So this was just a really nice. This is the last slide, and I would say, I think every quote is attributed to Mark Twain, actually. So I'm not sure if this is a Mark Twain quote for sure, but I just really like the slide. I hope it is. To succeed in life, you need 2 things: ignorance and confidence. Now, that obviously isn't true, but you can see the humor behind it. And obviously Mark was a genius in his own way. So I would ask colleagues who are listening, please keep those questions coming. We've had some really good questions through, and I've just been sort of capturing some of them on the bottom of the screen here. So please do keep them coming through. But the first question I've got, Ed, for you is, can everybody do everything? I mean, that was part of what we've all been told over the last 20 years. You know, I don't have any of those sort of attributes that are there, or any of those attributes that are there. I have some of them, of course, you know, but can I still be, you know, a salesperson with huge and aggressive targets? You know,
Yeah,
why not? Why can't I be? Can I be?
I think perhaps, I mean, you can give anything a go, can't you? It's whether you're going to really, really thrive and succeed at it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I would always suggest thinking about, you know, what do you enjoy doing? What are you good at? And sort of focusing on some of those a little bit more. I think you're right, going back to your previous comment that maybe over the last sort of 10, 20 years, there's a push for anyone can do anything, you know, and you just need to practice at it. And I would perhaps suggest maybe that's not always a good thing. You do get, you know, the old sort of square peg round hole. You know, can we really make better use of what people are genuinely good at? And will they enjoy that more if they do that as well? So yeah, you know, if you've got sort of tough targets, high pressures in relation to those targets at work, and that's not really you, perhaps that's not the sort of best job fit, and perhaps there's other things you'd be good at. So I do think in many workplaces, there's that honesty with yourself and honesty with management and others that you work with around actually what am I really good at, and actually can I focus more on doing that rather than trying to be an all-rounder or to be trying to specialize in something that you're maybe not going to be that strong at. And there's also, I think, some other pushes, other factors that come into play here as well when it comes to things like leadership. You know, we discuss leadership quite a lot. I think there's often a big drive for people to want to be leaders. You know, it's seen as in modern society quite prestigious to be a leader, but some people perhaps don't have the right mix of skills, whether that be sort of technical competencies or some of the softer skills that we might brand them. I would say softer skills is not really the right term for that, but if we don't have those, should people still be pushing to try to be a leader, a CEO, a senior executive, purely because they want the sort of prestige that goes along with that role?
Yeah, Ed, I'm just going to move you up to the top of my screen here because I'm mindful that I'm just staring down at the bottom of my laptop. So Ed, you and I was last week, we were at a conference together and we were talking about leadership excellence, health and safety leadership excellence, and something that goes back to that organizational resilience model was the thing that we discussed around, do we ever ask leadership teams who were looking to recruit, to bring into an organization, do we ever ask them, well, what do you think about health and safety? What do you think about, we might ask, you know, how do you get people to hit their sales targets? We might ask, you know, how do you bring the best out of your teams, you know, whatever. But we don't tend to ask them what their thoughts are on some of those issues or some of those attributes that we think are, or not we think, that the evidence suggests is important to building organizational resilience. Would that be a good thing? I assume it would be, you know.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, you're right. I think there are certainly some different questions we can bring to the table. I think one of the dangers, I mean, so many organizations rely really heavily on interviews as a way of selecting senior management, particularly. Sometimes they might throw in a few psychometrics, but even the use of those can sometimes be quite questionable in the way they're applied. The real challenge, I would say, around throwing those questions, one, it will give you, I guess, a different perspective. You're trying to tap into values, aren't you? You want to understand what's driving this person. Are they passionate about this stuff, or is it more lip service that they're paying to?
Yeah, 100%.
And the challenge there is, are you going to get to the sort of core of what people really think, or are they going to tell you what you think you want to hear? You know, are they going to say, oh yeah, I think health and safety is really important, I'm really passionate about it? You're probably going to get into the realms of that kind of conversation potentially. And I think it was a famous American psychologist who picked up on the point that sometimes recruitment processes, particularly for senior leadership, he branded them as a beauty contest. You know, you say and do the right things and you can get through it's not necessarily that you have the right competencies, the right skills, the right attributes, and so on. You're just able to navigate the selection processes. So I think there's an argument that we need to get a little bit better at the way we recruit some of those senior posts in organisations.
So that leads us really into this first question that we've had today, is how can teams be developed, as I think this is a sort of a manager, how can teams be developed to be more resilient?
Yeah, I think there's probably quite a few points. If you want to, I don't know if you're able to skip back a few slides,
Yeah,
but on your organisational slide here, this one, I think there's a lot of lessons that can be drawn out of this model. I mean, at the very top there, having that clear vision, the mission and goals that you're trying to achieve, absolutely critical. You've got to be knowing the direction you're going in and the direction the team's going in, and are your values aligned to that as well? That's all going to be really important stuff. Some of the stuff you've already picked up on about connections in the workplace, those social connections and those bonds that we have, things like sharing information. I mean, that's something that's depending on the culture in the organization, sometimes that sort of how information is treated. Sometimes it's sort of the old knowledge is power. People hold on to that and they don't share it. They don't pass it on to the right people. So those kind of things really critical. The managing of change, again, that ties nicely back to the management standards for work-related stress. Well, how is that process managed? Do we get people on board? Do we get their views? So I guess in many ways, Matt, there's a lot of stuff that isn't that groundbreaking. It's just that in day-to-day work, particularly with leaders and managers, they can get so focused on other aspects of their job that maybe we forget some of these old school fundamentals of speaking to our teams, making them feel included, respected.
It'll never catch on, Ed. It'll never catch on. But isn't it that's really good news for the people who are listening today, our colleagues listening today. It doesn't have to be, bringing in some very, very expensive consultant. Actually, it just takes some deliberate care, looking across the piece, looking at the demands if they're reasonable, looking at the models that are already available, well researched, informed. I mean, we've mentioned now probably 3 or 4 times about the management standards that HSE, I think they've been around since about 2006.
I think
Does that sound about right?
I think they were launched.
And I presented on these not long ago, and actually, again, colleagues from the stationery office who do lots of HC's publications were presenting on a new model they have for the management standards at a conference recently, and everyone was busy scribbling these down and saying, "Oh, they sound like a good idea," and you think, "Come on, guys, you know about this. These are available. They're a resource. They're tried. They're tested, and they do work." And more importantly, as you've said, it's not earth-shattering stuff either, is it? And I was talking to one of the policy leads on the management of stress within HSE actually, and he said actually within their teams what they do is they bring, I think, is there about six different factors, dimensions within, is it 6, something like that, and they sit down as a team and they just have that in front of them and they go, go on then, right, let's look at demands. How's everybody doing? How much work has everybody got? Is everybody coping well? How's relationships? We all getting on, and they have that very quick conversation and they almost use it just as a little prompt in a meeting. That takes no time at all, and actually it can really start to flag some of those issues. And I thought, oh, what a nice little tool that is, and there's obviously the much bigger piece that you can do around the management standards, but I just think there are small interventions that can be adopted.
Definitely. I'd certainly advocate that, using those kind of tools at a team level like that, having those conversations. There's also that element of how you then perhaps extract and feedback some of the deeper organizational issues as well. So just in that example there, if you're discussing things like work demands, one of the points I made earlier on is this: we live in a culture nowadays where it sort of seems to be do more with less. There's almost this promise of alchemy that we're going to achieve things with fewer and fewer resources all the time. And linking into some of the organizational resilience aspects here, something that is really critical is having that, I guess, forward look, the succession planning within organizations. And with data that we collect on things like leaving rates, intention to leave, and all that kind of stuff, we can really pick up on some of the challenges we might be facing. In many sectors, we see that there are aging workforces. Are we looking at those issues now and making sure that in a year, a couple of years time, 5 years time, we're going to have the right level of resource, the right level of competency, composition within the organization? Because if we're not looking at those things now and sort of predicting and forecasting and doing stuff at this point in time, those things are just going to appear as problems in the future. Right. So issues like workload demands might just appear because we've not considered making sure we've got the processes in place. In fact, when I used to work in the offshore industry, I worked with an offshore installation manager. And he used to lose a lot of personnel to other offshore assets. So one of his philosophies, I really love, he used to talk about healthy fat in the organization.
Healthy
fat.
Healthy.
But what he meant by that was having basically a succession planning process. He was constantly looking at how can I make sure that we've got people coming through, that we're sharing and exchanging that knowledge and experience, so that when he was losing personnel from his asset to another asset, he'd got people coming through continuously. So really tuned into that succession planning. So things like excessive demands and so on, that they might have still been present to some extent, but that was being proactively looked at and managed as well as possible. So there are some good examples from industry, I think, like that. I'm not sure healthy fat's the best way of framing it.
No,
but I like that.
But it's absolutely. I think I think it's a really fun term, and it sticks in your head, doesn't it? And that leads on to all the questions that have just been asked, actually, Ed, around what does it I mean, you spend a lot of time going into organizations with your consultancy hat on through health and safety executive science division. I'm sure you see, I'm sure people don't call you in to tell them how great things are, but when you've been to an organization has great resilience, that looks good, really tangible, can you feel that when you're there? Is it obvious compared to those organizations that may be struggling?
Yeah, I think perhaps that does echo and emphasize some of the conversation we've had about the focus on organizational resilience. That I think the organizations that look healthier from that point of view are those that invest in things like succession planning. They are perhaps better at things like managing change. They are perhaps a bit more forward thinking when it comes to risk management. They are looking for a little bit like the high reliability organization stuff that we sometimes talk about. They are proactively thinking about what sort of things could go wrong. Are we doing enough about that? Do we have enough in way of emergency plans to deal with any sort of situations that might arise? So yeah, those kind of things are more present. Communication flows much more freely between individuals and team members. People get that when they need it. Things like vision and strategy are clearer and all that kind of stuff. And also, I mean, it's probably a bit rarer, but things like organizational values that actually they are part of the organization, that they're not just we've got this on our website and it's for our stakeholders to look at and think, oh, that looks great. But they actually are lived by the organization. That people really treat those as something that they have to bring to life daily in their work. I think all those things can contribute to that. And maybe one thing that I haven't mentioned, but I've just noticed, and on your the model that you brought up here again as well, is this element of diversity, really respecting and appreciating diversity. I think sometimes there's lip service paid to diversity and inclusion, but I think the downside, if you don't get that right, you end up with sort of groupthink and other biases in that sort of board level teams. But genuinely valuing different perspectives, even if you might find that a little bit difficult to digest, that's really key. And I think some of the better organizations I've seen, that challenge can take place. You can say, oh no, I disagree with you for these reasons, and you can have a healthy conversation about that.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what you're saying about values. I think all too often people think values are almost goals, and actually value is part of you, isn't it? And actually those organizations who really do invest in them, rather than it just being a poster on the wall, there are massive benefits to that, aren't there? It's not something that should just be done by a consultancy going in. It needs to be developed and informed by what the workforce feel, need, direction of the business, that sort of thing.
Definitely. People feel quite conflicted if you put on a poster that these are our values, and then you start work and actually you find that's a load of rubbish, and that's you can forget about that straight away. Then that's actually quite stressful for individuals as well, and teams as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, it makes it a mockery rather than something which is which is core and essential,
Yeah,
doesn't it?
definitely.
So you mentioned something earlier around resilience engineering, this sort of safety 2 type focus. Is that something you can expand upon at all, Ed? I thought it was a really nice
Yeah.
term.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's certainly not something I'm an expert on, but a lot of it flows from some of the sort of leading lights in that sort of area, people like Eric Harnagel. And I think the definition that's often picked up is this ability to succeed under varying conditions. And again, there are going to be lots of things that you've got in this particular model which pick up on some of that around risk management, being proactive, and so on. I guess maybe one of the things that isn't included here, which Eric has unsurprisingly would pick up on, is not only can you learn from what goes wrong in an organization, but also what can you learn about what goes right, what goes well. And sometimes the conditions between good outcomes and bad outcomes are almost identical. There might be a very subtle change in context and so on. What can we learn from all this variation in work, regardless if there's purely a bad outcome as well. So I think incorporating some of that in, it still seems a little bit maybe too advanced for a lot of organizations. We've worked on the investigation qualification as well, Matt, and there are still so many organizations that struggle with what you might frame as safety 1 incident investigations. So to move to looking at what goes well and how people adapt in uncertain, complex conditions is perhaps for many organizations a little bit of a step too far at the moment.
Yeah, and we're taking that sort of safety 2 thinking. Do you find, is it possible in your experience, and I assume the answer is yes, but I should never assume, that it's possible to have resilience bubbles within an organization where you've got some teams who are absolutely thriving and then others who are struggling culturally?
Yeah, I think that's really fair to say. I think there's, in larger organizations as well, you're also aware over the years I've been involved in various bits of work on culture in organizations. And I think you always tend to find that there's not an organizational culture, but you see pockets of different cultures at different, what you might call maturity levels. So I think that's probably right as well, that in relation to things like resilience in organizations and just the general feel and culture within teams in organizations, that can be very different from team to team. And probably a lot of that will stem to the leader of those teams and the interactions they have with those teams, and the sort of values and culture and so on, attitudes that are embedded within the people in those teams as well.
Yeah, it's the point we come back to time and time again, isn't it? That people are still being promoted for their technical ability rather than, well, technical ability is of course essential, important. We're not undermining that in any way, but they also need other attributes as well in order to benefit their team. So I'm mindful of time. I think we've got about 2 minutes left. So Ed, just one final question in terms of organizational resilience, individual resilience. Is the role of the safety practitioner then to engage much more readily with HR functions to I know they're already a fairly thinly spread resource anyway, but where they can be most impactful, is it getting involved in recruitment processes, is encouraging this sort of early selection of health and safety leaders? Is that where they can be most impactful? Or
yeah, I'd certainly advocate some of that there's maybe greater collaboration between those, the health and safety practitioners, the HR teams. I would advocate, as we've talked about already, this sort of focus perhaps a little bit more on the organizational side as well, but also to think about if any organizations are embarking on looking at individual level resilience development and training and those kind of interventions. I mean, I certainly wouldn't argue against that. I'm sure it contributes some degree of value, but I would encourage organizations, whether they be HR practitioners or health and safety practitioners, to think about what problem are you trying to solve with that intervention. What are you aiming to get out of that as an organization? Are you just expecting to be tougher and cope more with the issues that are thrown at them? Are you expecting better well-being of individuals? Are you expecting to see sickness absence reduce? I think a lot of organizations do interventions, not just resilience, but all sorts of other interventions, without really thinking about what they want to get out of it. And then they don't evaluate it either as well, because they don't even know what they're trying to get out of it as well. So I would say, think about why are you thinking about applying that intervention? What do you want to get out of it? And actually, are you going to invest a little bit in evaluating it to see if you're getting that return out of it as well?
Brilliant. Thanks, Ed. We're going to have to end it there. That was, Ed, I love working with you. You know I do. I always get a lot out of our conversations. Thanks ever so much for taking the time for joining us today on our first digital conference. And I hope to see you again in the future.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's been good again. Thank you very much.
Take care.
Cheers.